Welcome back. Hello. And my name is Dr. David Hurst, and we are here for the MAN 3025 Introduction to Management and Organizational Behavior. We are going to be going over the first half of Chapter 3, the environment and corporate culture. Now, the first half means that we're going to be talking about the corporate environment, and then in Chapter 4, we'll be combining this with this first part of Chapter 3 for this section of the course. Chapter 4 is about the global environment. The reason why I broke Chapter 3 into two pieces is because we do have a section of the course, Chapter 11, that's about the internal environment of an organization, such as organizational culture, which is more attuned to the second half of Chapter 3 than combining it with, for example, the global environment. So let's get started. First of all, the external environment includes all elements that an organization is going to come into contact with. So we're talking about anything outside of the organization, and how the internal environment of the organization, ultimately, what we'll talk about eventually, reacts to that. We have several different areas of the external environment. First of all, you might have an area called the task environment. This is a section of the world where the organization directly interacts. So any kind of customers or government agencies that they have direct contact with, this is the task environment. The organizational ecosystem is all other aspects of the environment outside of the organization that could affect the organization, even if the organization isn't directly interacting with them, either institutions or people. And of course, how the internal environment reacts to those external factors will result in whether or not the organization is successful in navigating through business sectors. Graphically, this kind of looks like this. You have this general task and internal environment. The internal environment is affected by these task environments, which include the customers, competitors, suppliers, and the labor market. And the general environment, which is outside of the task environment, but envelops the task environment, which includes technological changes within an organization, within an environment, such as within a country, natural differences between countries, sociocultural differences, economic issues, legal and political issues, and lastly, international issues that may arise. Now, you have to consider the international dimension of the environment because we are in a global business environment. The issue with the global business environment is that it might be a blip in human history. We're not certain. This idea of globalization really kind of came about in the second half of the 20th century in order to weave countries together economically to avoid world wars. This started after World War II and eventually became larger than just Europe and kind of enveloped all of the world. Unfortunately, this clashes with a lot of nationalism and thinking around individual agendas, such as agendas within a particular country. And we'll talk about that to a greater extent all throughout the course. All right, let's talk about these external environments, the ecosystem. First, technological environments. When we're talking about technology, we are talking about a specific country's access to and development of technology. Here in the United States, we take a lot for granted. We have a blanket over us of Wi-Fi, cellular connection, easy access, and free access to most of these things, and particularly when it comes to things like banking and communicating. This is not something that's available through much of the rest of the world. We have sections of the world, pockets of the world, where there's heavy reliance on technology because it's so easy and cheap to get a hold of. Other sections of the world where it's not easy and cheap to get a hold of, in fact, it's almost impossible to get a hold of, which deeply crimps that sections of the world's ability to move forward in a global economic environment. So when you do business in other areas of the world, you have to think to yourself, how advanced is this area? What can I rely on? What can't I rely on when it comes to technology? Sociocultural differences. There are big sociocultural differences within the world, and they affect how products are used and also what people will accept within products. A great example of this happened when BMW decided to bring their flagship sedans over to the United States. They initially had no cup holders. And people didn't like them. They said, these are beautiful cars. They go incredibly fast. They're super wonderful. But we're not going to buy these because they have no cup holders. And BMW realized something. If they wanted to compete in the American market, they needed to provide cup holders because, unlike in Germany, Americans do everything in their cars, literally. So, if you're going to eat, drink, sleep, and whatever in your car, you need access to compartments, including cup holders. In Germany, people, particularly back when they started bringing the cars over, drove for the love of driving. And they had one particular road in which people love to go on, and that is known as the Autobahn, where you don't really want to be sipping on a Coke if you're going 120 miles an hour. You will get pulled over or you might crash. So these are some of the things that we have to think about when we go into other cultures. Will people buy this product, or is there a cultural difference that results in them not wanting to buy this product? Economic environment. Right now in the United States, we're in the middle of an economic boom, one of the largest economic and longest economic booms we've seen in our history. This is a result of all of the devastation that happened 10 years ago during a giant economic crash, one that is likened to the Great Depression and an extreme recession that was jobless for a number of years. As a result of this crash, assets became extremely inexpensive, and groups and individuals with cash were able to scoop up these assets. As the economy recovered, others lower down on the economic level began to benefit as well, such as within the middle class, and being able to purchase houses at reasonable rates because there was such a glut of houses on the market that had gone into foreclosure. This created an enormous amount of wealth within the houses as that glut began to get taken up, that slack in housing began to get taken up. And because builders hadn't been building, because there have been so many buildings already on the market, they got started late in starting to build new homes. These homes then became very valuable because there were fewer homes and greater demand, so supply and demand kicked in. Right now we have this huge economic boom that's going on, although it looks like we've hit kind of a peak, and we should be interested to see what happens over the next year or two as we kind of slide back towards a recession, which is common and actually normal as far as the economic cycle is concerned. Legal and political differences. There are always legal and political differences between nations. Some countries find it extremely important to tax individuals who have higher wealth in order to pay for all kinds of social programs. Sweden is a great example of this. As you gain more money, you owe more money. The idea being that everybody should live at a certain level, and people who have more money need to contribute more to make sure that the entire society has the opportunity to live at that level. This is a very interesting way of looking at things. Some people call it civilized, some people call it socialism, but the idea being that everybody has a right to live a life. This has become difficult for Sweden as they've taken in migrants, particularly from the Middle East, who don't seem to wish to work, particularly gypsies who have come across Europe, who are not welcome in much of the rest of Europe, but became welcome in Sweden, who are using begging instead of actually working in tax-paying jobs, which has resulted in a strain on their system. The natural environment. We hear a lot of talk about the natural environment. A very large report came out regarding the effects of climate change, for example, on the United States economy, which was then denied by our own government that created the report, which was very strange. So we have people who don't believe that climate change is man-made. We have people who do believe that climate change is man-made. The science is desperately clear. Climate change is affected by man-made issues such as carbon dioxide emissions from vehicles and factories. So these things do exist. Now the fouling of the environment, of course, affects everyone. It doesn't stop at nation borders. For example, if you end up having unclean air, it doesn't stay in one city, it blows to another. Just like with the Zika virus, the mosquitoes don't just stay in one area, they move around. So if they say mosquitoes are in this area, they really could be anywhere around that area as well. The natural environment is extremely important to all individuals because all individuals use the natural environment. However, this does not mean that regulation should stifle economic development to the point where individuals are suffering so much that the natural environment is not providing for them. Interestingly enough, also within the natural environment, we have to think about how cultures are tied to the natural environment. A lot of cultures use the natural environment as part of their process, as far as their daily process. Not just bathing in rivers and in lakes, but also it might be catching fish along coastlines, villages, for example, or even utilizing leaves for wrapping food, things like that. So these things need to be taken into consideration as cultural heritages become affected by changes in climate or by fouling of the environment. Of course, there is a connection between the organization and the actual environment, and that's called the organization-environment relationship. We need to balance this, and this is difficult to do. As our exterior environments shift, not just the natural environment, but also the economic environment, the legal political environment, this creates uncertainty. We've seen a lot of this happen as our current levels of tariffs that have been going on since the beginning of President Trump's administration. Now, like them or hate them, as far as the tariffs are concerned, one thing we can all agree on is they create uncertainty, at least for the time being. Now, their end goal, of course, is to create greater levels of economic prosperity within the United States. Whether or not that's achieved is still to be seen. In the meantime, you still have to do business. You have to pay your people. You have to service your customers. You have to, in a reasonable way, acquire supplies and turn around and sell them as goods and services. So this level of upheaval, this level of uncertainty, drives businesses to look for certainty, to try to find ways to stabilize themselves. They may retract from certain markets. They may reduce services. They may decide to pass costs on to consumers. So these are the things that businesses have to face as uncertainty mounts. In other countries, certainty in the business environment is extremely fragile and often dissolves very, very quickly. A very sad example of this has been Venezuela over the past few years. Every few years, Argentina goes through a major economic crisis. Again, very sad as a result of the loss of wealth and the increase in poverty that it creates due to poor economic management within the country itself. So how do we connect back to these environments? Well, we have to create roles. We have to create boundary-spanning roles. We have to come up with business analytics. And this is information that's readily available usually for a price, to the general public, but also it's generated by our own government. You can find this in things like statistics within the Department of Labor, as well as information on the Consumer Price Index and things like that the government puts out every few months sometimes, and sometimes every month. More importantly, what we find is that business and success is a team sport. Not just within your own business, but between different businesses. The companies that come up with ways to make their applications, their phone apps, for example, work across platforms are the ones that are significantly more successful than those that can't seem to make that happen. So how do we do this level of interagency, interorganizational cooperation? Well, you can do it through mergers. You simply have companies come together and merge and become a completely new company. We see this in industries where you have a lot of smaller companies and they merge together to create bigger ones to create greater levels of competition. As mergers increase, though, it does reduce competition, which is anti-capitalist, believe it or not, anti-market-based capitalist, believe it or not, to the point where with a mature market economy, you end up with significantly smaller numbers of people, numbers of organizations. That's where we are in the United States. We have what's known as a mature market economy. So really in any industry, you can only see about 5 major players. If you look at the airline industry, we have Southwest, we have United, US Airways and American combined. We have, let's see, who else? Northwest and somebody else combined. So I'm losing track. We only have 4 major airlines in the United States. If you include JetBlue in that group, maybe 5. And the same thing for cellular service providers, Verizon, AT&T. We had T-Mobile and Sprint. They're combining. Same thing within all kinds of other services. Also, companies can do joint ventures where they create businesses where they share in the profit and loss of them in order to enter new markets or new technology areas. Verizon Wireless did this. When Verizon decided they wanted to create a wireless division, they realized that they had the expertise, but they didn't have the money to do it. They had just got done creating Verizon itself from 3 other smaller telephone companies. So they went to Germany's Vodafone. Germany pumped in money, gave them 49% of the company, and Verizon Wireless was born. In the last 5 years, Verizon Wireless actually went and bought out Vodafone. All right, and that is it for now as far as our show is concerned. And that's Chapter 3 And we will move on to Chapter 4 next as part of this section.